Civil War would not be as patriotic as their parents who had saved the Union during the Civil War. And so they wanted some program in the public schools that would inspire the children. So one way of doing it was the Pledge of Allegiance was put together to be said by all school children, but that was very controversial. There were others who thought instead of pledging allegiance to the flag, we should recite the basic principles that our country was based on from our Declaration of Independence. And so we begin every Liberty and Prosperity meeting by reciting that alternate declaration from our Declaration of Independence, and that's this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted exercising their just powers with the consent of the governed. And those were the basic principles of our Declaration of Independence, and it's very hard to find a single speech made by Abraham Lincoln during the course of the Civil War that did not somehow refer to those basic principles. And where you have those basic principles, you have liberty, which brings us to another interesting point. 1 month after the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia, New Jersey redesigned its seal as an independent state in August of 1976, and this is what they came up with. 2 goddesses standing next to each other. One, the goddess of liberty, one, the goddess of prosperity. You recognize the goddess of liberty, and of course, they teach all this in our schools since kindergarten, correct? So I'm sure all you young people are familiar with the basic heritage of our country. But anyway, how do you recognize the goddess of liberty? She's holding 2 symbols in her right hand. One is this red cap called the Phrygian cap. And that symbolizes in ancient Rome, that's what a slave wore in ancient Rome after he or she had gotten her freedom. Perhaps by winning his freedom in the gladiator game, perhaps by being released by a kind master, perhaps by saving money and buying his or her freedom. So by wearing this red cap, ancient Roman slaves said, I used to be a slave, but now I'm free. The other symbol is this wooden plate. And that was the weapon of the common man in Europe, whether the peasant, the farmer, the tradesman, the mechanic, because they didn't have the money for a horse, a sword, a shield, any of the weapons that the nobles, the knights had. All they had was a simple wooden stick. And obviously, if one knight would fight one person armed with a simple wooden stick, that simple, ordinary person would be cut to pieces in a matter of seconds. However, if the whole village would turn out with their wooden sticks, they could knock the knights off their high horses and preserve their liberty. So that's why these 2 things became the symbol of liberty. Symbol of prosperity, of course, the cornucopia. Cornus means horn. Copious, any student who is told to take copious notes means plenty, right? So the cornucopia filled with abundant goods. And when New Jersey became independent 1 month after the Declaration of Independence for the United States, our seal noticed that liberty and prosperity always came together. And so we learned the lesson that when we try to get wealth and prosperity at the expense of somebody else's liberty or freedom, we end up with neither liberty nor prosperity. So it's hard to imagine that liberty and prosperity is the motto of New Jersey. We have the right slogan if only we honored those words. So that's what brings us here today. All right, now let's talk about Richard Somers. And I don't know where to begin the story, but I guess the best way to begin the story is the latest movie that was made about the landing of the moon. Those of us who were old enough to remember in 1969 remember that event vividly. I happened to be in Taiwan, China at the time, and I just remember all these Chinese people who I never met before coming up to me and shaking my hand and say, you're so proud to be an American, because we saw the American flag being held by Neil Armstrong, and we saw the American flag on his patch. But a new generation going to the movies and thinking that history is in the movies and the popular culture will find the American flag missing both from the moon and from the patch. And so the American flag was erased from history. And we saw that happen just within our lifetime. But that is exactly how Richard Somers was erased from history 50 or 60 years ago. And we all know why. And by the way, I want to emphasize, I'm not going to go through the entire story of Richard Somers and his bravery, because the community is going to have a second observation of the specific deeds of Richard Somers. And that's going to be Sunday right at this spot at 2 o'clock on September 9th. But that story is going to leave out some uncomfortable and inconvenient truth, which I'm going to bring out now. It's going to talk about how Richard Somers and the American Navy in 1801 to 1805 fought a forgotten war called the Barbary War against these pirates who were attacking American ships and holding American sailors and passengers as hostages until money was paid. And we will talk about how America went to fight those pirates, how we defeated them, and made the Mediterranean Sea safe for people to sail freely up and down. We'll hear how Richard Somers died in an important battle in that war, how his body, the bodies of the 12 other members of his crew, the ones you see on the back of that statue, were buried in Tripoli, and how they're there today, and how it's important to bring them back home so we can properly honor them and respect them. And that will be the story. And who is the enemy? We will be told that the enemy was the Barbary pirates of North Africa. And it's just an obscure war of a corner of history that really has no relevance today. So you will hear that story next Sunday. But I will try to not repeat that story, but to tell you some inconvenient facts that no one will tell you. And of course, that story begins in the 700s, when a new violent religion came out of the Arabian Peninsula. And within 50 years, that new religion, Islam, completely wiped out 2/3 of the Christian world. Soon afterwards, it wiped out about 2/3 of the Buddhist and Hindu world in India, going the other side. There were brutal massacres, slavery, unspeakable brutality in that process. And when you just think of it, think of how in 50 years, before modern warfare, before modern transportation, one civilization basically wipes out most of two great civilizations in 50 years. It's a terrifying prospect. And when you read about that in history, the details of how it happened, and it's no secret, the rules of engagement were that the Muslims would come up to a city and they said, "Will you surrender?" And if you surrendered, you would be allowed to live. And if you surrendered and were allowed to live, you just had to agree that Islam was supreme. Your religion could be tolerated, but you had to pay an extra tax, and you had to know your place. You had to recognize that while you could practice your religion, then you could not do or say anything that would imply that your religion was equal to Islam. And if you did that, you would be tolerated. If, for whatever reason, your city or village did not open up the gates and admit the Islamic army, then they would attack you, and it would be jihad, and every man, woman, and child would either be killed or put into slavery. Those were the rules of engagement. And the Middle East used to be all Christian strongholds. North Africa, Tunisia, Christian stronghold. You may know the St. Augustine. Where did he live? What's currently Tunisia. So all these Christian centers were wiped out. We know that the Pope in Rome is the center of the Christian world, but back then there were 5 popes, right? There was a Pope in Alexandria, Egypt, a Pope in Damascus, Syria, a Pope in Constantinople. There were many, many centers of the Christian world, but all of them were basically wiped out. During that time, they had a saying that not a Christian plank of wood would be allowed to float in the Mediterranean unless the Muslims permitted it. So all the shipping and trading in the Mediterranean world was completely wiped out. And of course, Spain was conquered, but and then we had the Crusades, which sort of stabilized things for a while. But then there was another round of aggression from the Islamic world, and that was from the Ottoman Turks. And you could see from the, if you would go around, I don't want you to be disturbed right now, but you see where it has the Barbary, I guess, pirate kingdoms, the four Barbary kingdoms, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. It makes it look like the politically correct version is that's who we were fighting. But if you go on Shore Road and see where that map continues, you'll see that the real enemy was what was called the Caliphate of the Ottoman Turks at Istanbul. And in the 1400s, that aggression started. And that aggression began by going to the gates of Vienna. You don't hear about Vienna being besieged by an Islamic army, but it came very close to being wiped out. Had Vienna fallen, that would have been the end of Christian Europe. But there are also bitter sea battles like Lepanto and Malta and Cyprus, battles that you don't even read about in history because they've been erased from our history books. But one of the biggest battles, of course, was the fall of Constantinople, the center of the Eastern Roman Empire, the home of the Santa Sophia Church, the center point of the Christian world. That got wiped out. In fact, the St. Peter's in the Vatican was built as a substitute replacement for what was destroyed. But anyway, out of hundreds of years of battle, there was a stalemate in which the Ottoman Turks did not advance. Christians were not strong enough to take back what was lost. You had a 200-year stalemate. And that 200-year stalemate was going on when America became independent. 7 years after our Declaration of Independence, 1783, we become independent. American sailors are going all over the world to sell our wood, our fish, our hot iron, all the resources of America we were selling to Europe. But when our ships went into the Mediterranean Sea, they were attacked by people we never heard of. And so we wanted to ask the European allies, well, who are these people? Why are they attacking us? And you've heard me tell the story before that Thomas Jefferson was our ambassador to France. John Adams was our ambassador to England. And the Europeans set up a meeting between them and the ambassador to Muslim states and said, well, why are you attacking us? Why are you killing our people? And we heard the story before. The reason was nothing personal. Our Holy Quran says that we Muslims are entitled to rule the world, and if anyone does not submit or pay tribute to us, we have the obligation to kill them, enslave them, take everything they own, because that's what we're instructed to do. And by the way, you better not resist us, because any of our warriors who dies while engaged in jihad is guaranteed eternal life in paradise. And so you better not mess with us. Thomas Jefferson, that meeting took place in London in 1783. Thomas Jefferson, and he can't believe it. He goes out in the streets of London to try to get an English translation of the Quran, which he does, which is how that book ends up in his library, if you may have heard that story. So in any case, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, they say, we must fight these pirates, we must bring an end to this. But the Continental Congress, remember, we didn't even have a constitution. We didn't have a president. We didn't have a navy. And so Congress responded, sorry, we will have to pay the ransom that these people demand because there's no way we can fight them. And so for the next 15 years, Americans paid 10% of the national budget in tribute and ransom to buy off the people so they would not attack our ships. I'll fast forward, 1798, French pirates think they're going to imitate the Islamic pirates in the Caribbean. I'm sure you heard of the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So America goes and tries to negotiate with France, saying, what are you robbing our ships for? And they said, okay, we'll talk to you about it, but first pay us a bribe, because you're already paying bribes to the Muslims. Why not pay bribes to the French? And we all know what happened. If we know our history, Americans found out about it, went crazy, and they coined a slogan called "Millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute." And we took all the money we were paying in bribes and built a navy in 1898. And Richard Somers, then age 20, and his buddy, his roommate from college, Stephen Decatur, joined that first navy. They got their on-the-job training. They defeated the pirates, and the American Navy was born. People learned to respect us. In 1801, the Kingdom of Tripoli said they weren't getting enough money from the Americans, and so they declared war on America. Thomas Jefferson said, "Make my day," sent the fleet over there, and within a short period of time, the Americans won. And the story of doing it, that's the story you'll hear on Sunday. Chip Reed is a remarkable historian on the tactics and the fact of how the Americans won. One reason the Americans won, we were so big and healthy and strong because we had such prosperity that the average American was about 3 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier and more muscular than anybody on the other side of the Atlantic. And in hand-to-hand combat, that made a big difference. In any case, after 3 of the 4 pirate kingdoms surrendered and made peace with America and agreed not to touch our ships and not to collect any ransom, the guy in Tripoli got smart. He says, "I'm going to stop fighting the Americans. I'm going to bring my fleet into the harbor. I'm going to wait for Congress to say it's tired of spending money on this war, this overseas war." And it looked like they were right, because Thomas Jefferson, as you recall, in the summer of 1804, did a little real estate purchase, remember? He bought Louisiana, which was twice the size of America. So now there's no money for the war, because he bought Louisiana with it. And so the sailors off of Tripoli were afraid that Congress would bring them home and end the war before they finished their mission. That's when Richard Somers and 12 crew members decided a daring mission. They would attack a captured Arab ship with explosives, bring it into Tripoli harbor, and they would explode the Arab fleet and end the war in that dramatic way. We all know that they failed. We all know that they died. And we all know that Congress decided to end the war, pay the Muslims what they wanted, bring the ships back without achieving total victory. And some of you may know what happened next. The sailors and commanders of the Navy and of the Marines who got the ransom money, who got the orders to end the war and surrender, became insubordinate. They refused to disgrace the memory of Richard Somers and those 13 men on the Intrepid by making that surrender. So they illegally took the ransom money, hired a bunch of Christian Greek mercenaries, and together the Marines went across on the shores of Tripoli, America's first amphibious landing. They captured Tripoli, they ended the war, they freed the prisoners, and then for the next 180 years we had peace with the Islamic world. A byproduct of that, they found out that those Barbary kingdoms were the key center of slavery, both of whites and of blacks from Africa. And the Americans inspired the Europeans to also put an end to the piracy, the slavery. Within 50 years, the slave trade of both blacks and whites was ended. And that's the legacy of Richard Somers and the intrepid sailors who fought in that war. So now you can understand why there's no movie about Richard Somers, why you go to the your textbook in class. By the way, I was teaching history at Atlantic Cape Community College. They didn't even mention that Constantinople existed in the textbooks I was forced to teach. So now you know the rest of the story. And thank you very much for coming out, as we do every year, to honor Richard Somers. If you want to know more, go to the libertyandprosperity.com website. I invite all of you, now that we're hot and tired and thirsty, so let's go over to Gregory's to have lunch to help support our event. It's $25 for a cash bar buffet, and I'm sure you'll enjoy yourself, and we can all discuss the details in a more relaxed environment than here in the blazing sun. If anyone has any quick questions, I could answer them. Otherwise, I'd like you to ask me in the nice, cool, air-conditioned environment. Yes, Donna. Okay, the question is, why isn't this part of the presentation included in the city presentation? Well, I'll tell you what, we've had tensions. For a while it was. And anyone who's been to the ceremony and we've been doing it since 2005. So it's been 13 years of doing it, and you'll see that they would have dueling historians, where you have Chip Reed would say, no, it was just these guys were just in the pirate business. This was their economic development program, had nothing to do with Islam. And I'd be giving this story. But finally, but it was always tension. And this time, finally, the city decided to have a program that would not include me. And they scheduled it for first of all, the city was not going to do any program. And then we said, okay, we're going to do a program today. And then suddenly the city decided, okay, we're going to do a program after all. So we shamed them into doing a program after all. But the reason why, I think you know the answer. I don't have to say it. Any other question?
Why are you still over there and not over here?
The what?
Why don't they bring his body back to the United States?
Well, that you're not allowed to talk about either, because the plans were made to do it. But one particular senator from Arizona personally intervened to stop that from happening. And of course, now that he's been canonized as a saint, I can't tell you what his name is. Is there another? Okay.
I just wanted to ask, when
Linda.
a certain person that we all know gets into Congress, will he introduce another bill now that that other person has gone to heaven?
Well, whatever I can do to do the right thing, I will certainly do it. But I don't want to mix up the politics with the procedure, with this event.
No names mentioned here.
Okay, well, all right. Yeah, but I'll do that. So, yes, I am a candidate for Congress, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Okay, yes. The what? Yes, Jefferson's Koran is in a... Remember, when Thomas Jefferson left as president, he donated his entire library to the federal government, where it became the Library of Congress. So that Koran is in the Library of Congress today, and that's why when Islamic congressmen who get elected, they want to get sworn in with this Koran by pointing out how Islam is part of the American heritage. But now you know why that Koran ended up in Thomas Jefferson's library. All right, well, I'm going to continue. Okay, one final question. Yes. The what? Okay. I guess somebody thought it was they should play handball there. No, I don't know the reason. But whatever it is, they then touch the painting. All right, so if we're a little cooler, I'd explain. But what I'd like to do, as you walk out, you may want to see